Does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to a question of the privileges of the House and offer the resolution previously noticed.
The clerk will report the resolution.
Whereas in the United States system of checks and balances, Congress has a responsibility to hold the executive branch of government to the highest standard of transparency to ensure the public interest is placed first. Whereas, according to the Tax History Project, every president since Gerald Ford has disclosed their tax return information to the public. Whereas tax returns provide an important baseline disclosure because they contain highly instructive information, including whether the candidate paid taxes, what they own, what they have borrowed and from whom, whether they have made any charitable donations, and whether they have taken advantage of tax loopholes. Whereas disclosure of the president's tax returns could help those investigating Russian influence in the 2016 election understand the president's financial ties to the Russian Federation and Russian citizens, including debts owed and whether he shares any partnership interests, equity interests, joint ventures, or licensing agreements with Russia or Russians. Whereas the president fired FBI Director James Comey last week, whose FBI was investigating whether the Trump campaign colluded with Russia to influence the 2016 election. Whereas Attorney General Jeff Sessions, who made the recommendation to fire Director Comey, during sworn testimony neglected to mention his contacts with the Russian ambassador and recused himself from anything involving the Russian investigation. Whereas Senate Russia investigators have requested information from the Treasury Department's Criminal Investigation Division, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, or FinCEN, which handles cases of money laundering for information related to President Trump, his top officials, and campaign aides. FinCEN has been investigating allegations of foreign money laundering through purchases of U.S. real estate, whereas the president's tax returns would show us whether he has foreign bank accounts and how much profit he receives from his ownership in myriad partnerships. Whereas the president hired a law firm to send a letter to Senator Lindsey Graham to fight suggestions he has Russian business ties. This letter left open the question whether Mr. Trump or his firms received Russian income or loans or derived income from Russian-linked partnerships. Whereas Donald Trump Jr. said the Trump Organization saw money pouring in from Russia and that Russians make up a pretty disproportionate cross-section of a lot of our assets. Whereas the White House will not confirm whether the president has filed a 2016 tax return. Whereas Congress gave itself the authority to review an individual's tax returns to investigate and reveal possible conflicts of interest of executive branch officials involved in the Teapot Dome scandal. Whereas President Donald Trump's executive order on the review of designations under the Antiquities Act has directed the U.S. Secretary of the Interior, Ryan Zinke, to review national monuments that presidents have designated or expanded since 1996. Whereas this review is praised by industry groups who could benefit financially from oil, gas, and mining, and condemned by environmental organizations concerned this review will scrap or scale back critical federal designation to protect tribal and historic lands. Whereas the American people are in the dark to knowing if this review was started to justify selling or leasing public lands to private corporations that could enrich the president or his business partners without reviewing the president's tax returns. Whereas it has been reported that federal prosecutors have issued grand jury subpoenas to associates of former National Security Advisor Michael Flynn, seeking business records as part of the ongoing probe into Russian involvement in the 2016 election. Whereas, according to his 2016 candidate filing with the Federal Election Commission, the president has 564 financial positions in companies located in the United States and around the world. Whereas, against the advice of ethics attorneys and the Office of Government Ethics, the president has refused to divest his ownership stake in his businesses and can still withdraw funds at any time from the trust of which he is the sole beneficiary. Whereas the Emoluments Clause was included in the U.S. Constitution for the express purpose of preventing federal officials from accepting any present, emolument, office, or title from any king, prince, or foreign state. Whereas the most signed petition on the White House website calls for the release of the president's tax return information to verify compliance with the Emoluments Clause, with 1,094,000 signatures as of date of this resolution. Whereas the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, Joint Committee on Taxation, and Senate Finance Committee have the authority to request the President's tax returns under Section 6103 of the Tax Code. Whereas the Joint Committee on Taxation reviewed the tax returns of President Richard Nixon in 1974 and made the information public. Whereas the Ways and Means Committee used IRC 6103 authority in 2014 to make public the confidential tax information of 51 taxpayers. Whereas the American people have the right to know whether or not their president is operating under conflicts of interest related to international affairs, tax reform, government contracts, or otherwise. Now, therefore, be it resolved that the House of Representatives shall, 1, immediately request the tax return information of Donald J. Trump for tax years 2006 through 2015 for review in closed executive session by the Committee on Ways and Means as provided under Section 6103 of the Internal Revenue Code, and vote to report the information therein to the full House of Representatives. 2, support transparency in government and the longstanding tradition of presidents and presidential candidates disclosing their tax returns.
Does the gentleman from New Jersey wish to present argument on the parliamentary question whether the resolution presents a question of the privilege of the House?
Yes, Mr. Speaker.
The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The stunning conflicts of interest are piling up as the President and his family, his friends, profit in their personal business endeavors while serving in public office. Under Rule 9, Clause 1, questions of the privilege of the House are, quote, those affecting the rights of the House collectively, its safety, its dignity, and the integrity of its proceedings. There is nothing more of a threat to the integrity of this House than ignoring our duty to provide a check and balance to the executive branch, to restore the dignity of the House. We must use our authority to request Mr. Trump's and President Trump's tax returns and begin to save the American people the transparency they deserve. That's what we should be giving them. Now, Mr. Speaker, it's evidence time. Today, in the Wall Street Journal, in an article entitled, Russian State-Run Bank Financed the Deal Involving Trump Hotel Partner. It's a very interesting article, and I advise and I want to put it into the record with your permission. Thank you. Mr. Chairman, a letter was sent just recently for Mr. Trump's lawyers to Mr. Trump and then on to Senator Lindsey Graham. That letter was supposed to be an explanation of the President of the United States' involvement in the finances and vice versa of Russia and President Trump. It does not in any manner, shape, or form, Mr. Speaker, go into any partnership which may exist. There's nothing about that. There is nothing about the Russian state bank financing a deal involving Mr. Trump's hotel partner in Toronto. And number three, the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, as it is called, which is part of the Treasury Department, but independent. Independent. They have independent investigative powers. They are looking into the money laundering in that situation. They're already investigating that with these Russian oligarchs. Very interesting. And also we know of what happened.
To the question of order. Gentleman is reminded.
Well, I would like to know, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you would, Mr. Speaker, how foreign investments have enriched the President of the United States. That's the only way we're going to find out the conflicts of interest, the only way. So, I've heard some House leaders argue that the House should not concern itself with things outside of its control. But Section 6103 of the IRS Code is very much within the control of the House, if you've read it, giving specific responsibility to the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee. And the American people are demanding the Congress request the president's tax returns be exercised for several reasons. Mr. Trump has not divested himself from his businesses as was recommended by the Office of the Government Ethics. And Mr. Speaker, I think it is relevant. If we look at what was produced, remember it's evidence times, my friend. What was produced on January 21st of 2009? The ethics commitments by executive branch personnel. And what has been committed and produced under this administration. They have laughed at Mr. Schaub, who is the Ethics Commission chairman. They've laughed at him because it's almost like Cornelius Vanderbilt. You have the law, I have the power.
The chair will hear arguments only of whether this qualifies under the request.
On a question of privilege, Mr. Speaker. I'm sorry to interrupt. On a
the chair will only
of
hear
privilege, I'm talking about the privilege of this House. I'm talking about the privilege of Republicans and Democrats. We are all alike. We're all equal. Nobody's better than anybody else. And what I'm saying to you tonight, Mr. Speaker, is that this goes to the very heart of the issue and why this is a privileged resolution. Because we have a right to know, we have a right to uphold the integrity of this institution. Everybody, not just some. Mr. Trump has not divested himself from his businesses, as was recommended by the Office of Government Ethics. We need to see how our president, would personally benefit from changes to our tax code. Tax code changes proposed by this administration could lower his own personal tax bill by tens of millions of dollars. The American people have a right to know that. We've learned that earlier this year, the president apparently asked Mr. Comey to cease his investigation of the Trump National Security Advisor, Flynn. In a surprise move last week, Mr. Trump fired the director of the FBI.
The gentleman's reminded the gentleman's remarks must be confined to the question of order.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So I'm saying here, and very specifically, we have no way whether Mr. Trump or his firms have received Russian income. It is an insult to the integrity of this House, Republicans and Democrats alike. We need to know this. We need to know that the President of the United States is beyond question in his objectivity with any nation, and particularly those who are pretty shaky in relationship with, like Russia. A certified letter from paid attorneys that actually confirms the president, in fact, does have financial ties to Russia, does nothing to assuage these concerns. The legislative branch has the responsibility, it has the authority to check the executive branch, Section 6103, F1, very clear, very distinct. The privilege of the House, the privilege of the tax code, which allows for an examination of the tax returns. The authority put in place specifically so Congress could examine conflicts of interest in the executive following the Teapot Dome scandal. And as I mentioned before, the possible sale of public lands under this administration is not very different than the biggest scandal of the 20th century at Teapot Rock, Wyoming. Mr. Speaker, Nothing could be more of a threat to the integrity of this distinguished...
The chair has heard the gentleman's argument and is prepared to rule.
I have only 2 more minutes. May I finish?
If the gentleman confines his remarks to the question of order, the gentleman may conclude in the 2 minutes.
I'm confining my remarks to the question of privilege, which I said last night. And Mr. Speaker, I will not yield on that issue. That's all I'm doing. No more, no less. This is not a court. All I am saying is putting forth the rationale behind the resolution which I have put forth today. I put forth yesterday and was read today. We have nothing but evidence to justify an examination, Mr. Speaker. This is not hot air. If and when such conflicts are revealed, I do not want to say to our constituents, we had the power to review these conflicts, but we did nothing. I, for one, do not want the integrity, my integrity, the integrity of my colleagues, and the integrity of this House to be demeaned by such a shameful failure. And that goes to the very heart, in the own words, of what a privileged resolution is. To restore the dignity of the House, we must use our authority to request President Trump's tax returns and give the American people the transparency they deserve. And my concluding statement is this, Mr. Speaker. I mentioned Vanderbilt before, because that's a very powerful statement he made. Very rich guy. He felt he could do anything. The law? What law? I am all the power. This is not the United States of America. This is not our democracy. This is not what Republicans and Democrats have fought for since they've been in this House and before. I stand with us and only getting what we deserve. And then we decide whether we will communicate it to the American people through the Speaker. I thank you. And Mr. Speaker, thank you for your courtesies.
The material referenced by the gentleman's earlier unanimous consent request will be inserted following disposition of the question of order. The gentleman from New Jersey seeks to offer resolution as a question of the privileges of the House under Rule 9. As the chair ruled most recently on April 5th, 2017, the resolution directs the Committee on Ways and Means to meet and consider an item of business under the procedures set forth in 26 U.S.C. 6103 and therefore does not qualify as a question of the privilege of the House.
Mr. Speaker, I appeal.
For what purpose does he seek recognition? What purpose does the gentleman from New Jersey seek recognition?
I appeal the ruling of the chair.
Mr. Speaker, I have...
The question is, shall the decision
Speaker,
of the chair stand as the judgment of the House? For what purpose does the gentleman from Pennsylvania seek recognition?
I have a motion at the desk.
The chair will report the motion.
Mr. Roberts of Pennsylvania moves that the appeal be laid on the table.
The question is on the motion to table. Those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those opposed, please say no.
No.
In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays on this motion.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. Sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, this 15-minute vote on the motion to table will be followed by a 5-minute vote on the motion to suspend the rules and pass H.R. 1177. This is a 15-minute vote.